We have great things to look forward to. All right. So today we are going to finish up endocrine glands, and we should finish a little bit early. You ready? Okay. So we finished off on Wednesday talking about the adrenal medulla, and we said the adrenal gland is like a Tootsie Pop. You got the medulla is the Tootsie Roll in the middle, and then the adrenal cortex is the sucker on the outside. Okay. So the medulla produces which two things? Yeah. Yes, epinephrine and norepinephrine. Okay, and then the cortex, the sucker on the outside, is going to produce these things. Okay, so the cortex is going to secrete more than 25 steroid hormones, the corticosteroids that fall into these three categories. Now, you can thank us. We do not require you to know all 25 of these steroid hormones. You are welcome, okay? So instead, we want you to know these three categories. Okay, so the sex steroids, we call those the adrenal sex hormones. We'll talk about them some in a second. The mineralocorticoids, our example we're going to use is aldosterone. And then the glucocorticoids, our example is going to be cortisol. Okay? But they all come from the sucker part. Okay, the sex hormones first. Adrenal androgens. So androgens, they come from the adrenal gland. Okay? So in males, they have virtually no activity. So they're there, but they don't do much. So DHEA, dihydroepiandrosterone, and androstenedione are converted into testosterone in the testes. But the testes make much more testosterone on their own without this. Okay, so it's just like, it's there, but okay. In females, these androgens initiate the development of pubic and axillary hair and are responsible for libido. They're pretty important in girls. There is something called androgenital syndrome, where you have high levels of DHEA and androstenedione, which can lead to masculinization in females. And if there are high levels in males and females, you have gonadal suppression. Okay? So, not good things. All right. Now, moving on. The mineralocorticoids, so aldosterone is our example. What we ask you to know in AP1 is just this basic definition that we've got right here. When you get to AP2, which is coming soon, okay? It is next semester. Yeah.
Have a very high level of testosterone compared to other females. Is that?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I've never read that or heard that before.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I have a friend in mammalian anatomy, and apparently their professor was talking about it too. But I didn't know that. I didn't know if that was true. That's what you mean, mammalian.
Yeah. So, do you have that article? Can you find it? That's interesting. Okay, so, I mean, I don't know. That's odd. I don't know why that would be. So, historically, science majors have been more of the masculine disciplines because it's just what it is. But I thought that was more to do with social things. Like, socially, we say boys can do math and science and girls can't. So, anyway. Okay. I would like to read that. Okay. So next semester, AP2, we are going to see this pathway so many times, guys. We're going to look at this pathway in the circulatory system. We're going to look at this pathway in the urinary system. And we will look at this system, or this pathway, many times in between. Okay? So you will be tired of seeing the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone pathway. So just get used to it, okay? So I'm going to go through it really quickly, just this side right over here that involves the renin, angiotensin pathway. but just be prepared for later. Okay? So if you have a decreased blood volume or decreased blood pressure, we want to do something to increase our blood volume, to get more water into the blood. Okay? So the kidney picks up on this and knows that there's a problem, and he releases renin. And renin starts a cascade of events that eventually leads to the production of angiotensin, okay, which is another hormone. Okay? Angiotensin will cause the release of aldosterone from our adrenal cortex, and that goes to the kidneys and increases the reabsorption of potassium and sodium. No, reabsorption of sodium and potassium secretion. Goodness, sorry guys. By the kidney. Okay, so we're sucking up salt. We're reabsorbing salt. We're keeping the salt in the kidney. What do you know about water and salt? The salt will pull the water, okay, osmosis, okay, think back to our hypertonic solution. So the salt that's there will pull the water, and the water will come with it out of the urine. And so water will go back into the body and increase the blood volume because it follows that sodium, okay? There are other ways to increase the aldosterone release, including stress and increased blood pressure, activating the atrium to release ANP. Okay, so we also have some issues up there that we'll talk about later. Okay, aldosterone though also increases hydrogen ion secretion by the kidney, which again we'll talk more about later what that does. But right now, just nose the words on your chart. Okay. Oh, I thought I clicked it. There we go. Okay. Our other set of hormones are the glucocorticoids. Our example that we're going to look at is cortisol. Okay? So cortisol, and it says as well as ACTH and CRH, which we'll come back to them in a second, I'll make sense, exhibit a pulsatile and diurnal secretion pattern. So it pulsates. It comes in waves throughout the day. Okay? And it's also diurnal secretion, so it's primarily in the day. Okay, so you usually have 10 bursts daily of this cortisol hormone. It's lowest during early sleep. It's part of what brings our body into a restful state to go into sleep. But then, right before we wake up, so this is the sleep period, so right before we wake up, there is a burst of cortisol, which again will help us wake back up and be ready to go. Okay, so it's highest right before waking. It's regulated by your sleep-wake cycles, by those circadian rhythms that we've talked about before. And we talked about this morning, or this afternoon before class started. Okay, so it helps establish those sleep-wake cycles. Okay, and it also says on here that cortisol is regulated exclusively by the hypothalamic pituitary axis. So here's what that means. The hypothalamus, remember, is the master controller of the pituitary gland, right? So the hypothalamus releases a hormone, CRH, cortisol-releasing hormone, and that goes to the anterior pituitary, which causes the anterior pituitary to release ACTH, which goes to the adrenal cortex to tell it to release cortisol. So that is your hypothalamic pituitary axis. It goes hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal gland, secrete your cortisol. Okay? Cortisol is also considered a stress hormone, and we'll get to that in a second. Maybe the next slide. I don't remember. Yes, it is the next slide. Okay, so our adrenal hormones and stress. If we take this picture and divide them in half, the things over here on the left-hand side are short-term stress responses. So if something jumps out and scares you, you're going to use that left-hand side. On the right-hand side, we're looking at long-term stress response. Okay, so when you would have this naturally would be if you are in a period of starvation. Okay, so that is a long-term stressor. There are things, though, that can cause you to use that right-hand pathway, even if there isn't something legitimately life-threatening that happens for a long period of time. Okay, so some people find themselves in that long-term stress due to family issues or due to school or things like that. Okay. The end of the semester does not usually cause you to shift to this long-term stress. Sorry, you're still on the left-hand side. Okay. So short-term stress. Your sympathetic nervous system is doing his job. So you get information from the sympathetic nervous system. It goes to the adrenal medulla. And what does the adrenal medulla release? Epinephrine and norepinephrine. What do those things do to your heart rate? It increases your heart rate. What does it do to your breathing rate? Increases breathing. It also dilates your bronchioles to let more air come in. Okay? And it does have some metabolic effects too. It increases blood glucose levels by causing the liver to release glucose. And it increases your metabolic rate. So your body's just working faster. Okay? So that's a short-term stress. Epinephrine, norepinephrine are going to do their job, but then they'll be broken down and you'll return to normal. Your parasympathetic nervous system will kick in. Okay? The guy is running away from a fire. He uses that side. Okay. Now, long-term stressors. We're going to be working on this side. Okay? So, stressors will cause the hypothalamus to release a hormone to activate the anterior pituitary, to activate the adrenal gland, and we're going to get hormones from the cortex this time. Okay? So, we have glucocorticoids over here, and what was our example of our glucocorticoid? Cortisol is going to do these things over here. And on this side, we have our mineralocorticoids. And what was our example of a mineralocorticoid? Aldosterone. Yeah. So, what did aldosterone do? Cause reabsorption of sodium, which caused what to happen to blood pressure? Increase blood pressure. Okay? So long-term stress can cause high blood pressure. Okay? All right. On the other side, cortisol, also known as one of our stress hormones, it has some major metabolic effects. Okay? So it's trying to get energy. It happens during like starvation periods. So it takes certain parts of your body and breaks them down to increase blood amino acids. Okay, amino acids are the building blocks of what? Proteins. Where in your body are there lots of proteins? Your muscles. So one of the things cortisol does is break down muscle. So it breaks down muscle to release amino acids that you can then use for energy. Okay? It also causes the liver to release glucose. So you have blood sugar increase. And it causes your fat deposits to break down to release fatty acids that you can use for energy. Now, just looking at what's going on here, do you see any red flags of what could be dangerous in this process? You're breaking down muscle, right? Okay, muscle's really important. What's one muscle that's real big? Your heart, right? Okay, so you don't want to be breaking down the proteins in your heart. It's not a good thing. Okay, so that's one thing that's bad. What about fat and the blood supply? If we're increasing these fatty acids that are going around in your blood vessels, what's something that could happen? Yeah, so not a clot, but the fat sticks to the walls. Arteriosclerosis. That's one of those words I can't say. Okay, but the fat deposits build up on your blood vessel walls. Okay, which causes the blood to have problems pushing through. Okay, which also increases blood pressure. So high stress for long periods of time causes this process that has major cardiovascular issues. Okay, so you're breaking down heart muscle as well as increasing blood pressure, increasing fat deposits in the blood vessels. Okay, so it is best to make sure that you have alternate outputs for your stress, right? So you're not just all stressed all the time. You go out and you you have to do something to get rid of the stress. So you don't go into that long-term stress pathway and cause cardiovascular damage. All right, guys, we're almost there. The pancreas. So the pancreas is one of our last endocrine glands that we're going to talk about. It says that he is located retroperitoneally, so he's back there with the kidneys, and he's below and behind the stomach. Okay? Its endocrine tissue is called pancreatic islets. So in our picture here, the microscope picture, so we're zooming in, this guy right here is the pancreatic islet. So it's made up of a bunch of little cells that are endocrine glands. And then outside of them are acinar cells, which are exocrine. Okay, so we didn't make a big deal about this at the beginning of our endocrine section, and I should have. Okay, endocrine versus exocrine. Which one has ducts? Exocrine. Okay, and so we've talked about that before when we were talking about epithelial tissue, but just remember that. Okay, so exocrine glands have ducts. Endocrine glands are ductless. Okay, so we're going to talk about the pancreas here in the endocrine system, but then we'll come back and talk about the pancreas again when we're doing digestive system and look at these other cells right here. All right, so erase that and move on. There we go. Okay, so we have two pancreatic hormones that work antagonistically to each other, so they do the opposite things. Okay, inside that pancreatic islet, there were alpha cells and there are beta cells. Insulin is made by beta cells, and glucagon is made from alpha cells. Okay? Insulin is made when blood sugar levels are too high, and his job is to promote the synthesis of glycogen, so we're storing up glucose as big long chains called glycogen. We change some of that sugar to fat, we change some of that sugar to protein, so we're storing it away for later. Okay? That process will lower blood glucose levels. Okay, insulin is also good at helping the glucose get into just normal cells. So if we're getting the glucose into normal cells so they can use it, we're getting it out of the blood. Okay? Then glucagon does the opposite. He's secreted in response to low blood glucose levels. So his job is to stimulate fat catabolism, so taking those fat stores and breaking them down so we can get energy out of them. And then these two guys, okay? And again, we will come back and talk about these two guys at length in AP2 when we get to metabolism. But right now, glycogenolysis, it is taking glycogen and breaking it apart. Lysis is breaking it apart. So we're taking that glycogen, breaking it apart, and getting our glucose out of it again. Okay? And then gluconeogenesis, we are making new glucose. So we're taking things like protein, amino acids, and converting it into glucose, or fatty acids and converting it into glucose. Okay? But glucagon's job is to say, oh no, we don't have enough glucose, let's go get some. All right. The next picture is one you've already seen before. Okay? We talked about this at the very, very beginning of this chapter, but it's our homeostatic pathway for blood sugar. So if our blood glucose level gets too high, our pancreas picks it up and will release what? Insulin, right. And insulin will cause that glucose to be pulled out of the blood and stored away. Okay? So it gets stored away in the liver and it gets stored away in just everyday cells. Okay? When that gets pulled out of the blood, it lowers blood glucose because we've put the glucose somewhere else. And it returns us back to normal. Okay? If we haven't eaten in a while and our blood glucose levels drop, then the pancreas notices that and releases what? Glucagon. Okay? And the glucagon goes to where we have sugar stored up and says, release it. We need to get glucose throughout the body. Okay? All right. diabetes mellitus. I did not mean to say it that way. Sometimes I say it that way in my head just to make fun of the guy on the commercial, but I did not mean to say it that way in class. I'm sorry.
That's what my parents call it, making her right head.
It's not. No. Okay. So diabetes is a disease relating either from the hyposecretion of insulin, so you're not releasing enough insulin, okay, so hypo, or inactivation of insulin. So you're making enough insulin, but it's not doing anything. Either it can't bind to its receptors, or it binds to the receptor, but then the receptor doesn't do anything. He just sits there, holds the insulin, and says, hey, this is nice. I don't know what to do now, okay? And there are two types of disease, which we'll get to in a second. Okay, classic signs of diabetes mellitus are polyuria, polydipsia, and polyphagia. Okay, do you guys remember what this one is? A lot of pee. Dipsia is a lot of thirst. Okay, and I don't think polyphagia was on our other slide. Kidding? Hunger. Yeah. Okay, polyphagia is lots of hunger. Okay. So, blood test for this is going to reveal that they're hyperglycemic. There's lots of sugar in the blood because insulin is released when there's high blood sugar to get the sugar out of the blood. No insulin, sugar stays there. And then urine tests will show glycosuria and ketonuria. Glycosuria means there's sugar in the urine. There's not supposed to be. Okay? And ketonuria, we'll talk about ketoacidosis here in a little bit, but it's part of the breakdown of fats. So if you're not getting sugar into the cells have to use whatever else they can find. So they start breaking down a lot of fats, and so you can release ketones. Okay, now we have talked about another form of diabetes, right? What was the other form? Insipidus. Okay, what hormone was messed up in diabetes insipidus? ADH. Okay, antidiuretic hormone. Both types of diabetes have polyuria, polydipsia, polyphagia. Okay, so the reason they're both named diabetes is because of that class group of symptoms. Okay, so back in the old days, when they were trying to figure out what was wrong with somebody, they would say, "Oh, you have diabetes." Diabetes means it runs through. So you drink a lot, you pee a lot, you have diabetes. That was their general description. Okay? As they learned more, they added the second part, diabetes mellitus. Mellitus means from honey. Because one of the other things they started to do, and they did this pretty frequently back in the day because it was what they could do. They needed to see what that urine was like. And so they found out that people with diabetes mellitus had sugar in their pee. Yeah. Yeah. So there were one of the things doctors would do back in the day, like back in the day, is have people give urine samples and they would do taste tests to see what the person had. And so people with diabetes mellitus had sugary pee. And so that was one way to distinguish between diabetes mellitus, which was a sugar problem, okay, because their pee tastes like sugar, and diabetes insipidus, which was just a water problem. So you test their pee, you taste their pee, and if it was just really watery, you know they have diabetes insipidus, just give them some water. If they had sugary pee, you know they had diabetes mellitus, and there's other ways to treat that, okay? Which they didn't know back then because it was back in the old days. Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. So now I say that here's my off-track tangent of the day. So you knew it was coming. There are still people who drink pee. It's called urine therapy. It is not a medically supported thing. But there are some people who think that drinking your pee will cure everything because somehow in your pee you get out the things that you need to get back in. I don't know. urine therapy or orin therapy. You may hear it called that, but don't do it. Okay, just don't do it. It's
There's a lady on my train addiction.
So eventually you're going to become dehydrated if that's all you drink, because you're just not putting more water in. You're just putting in what you've taken out, and eventually you're going to run out. And if you're peeing it out, it's something your body doesn't need. Anyway, getting back on topic. Okay, the two types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. Okay, type 1 is also known as insulin-dependent diabetes mellitus. So it refers to the destruction of beta cells from an autoimmune disorder. So your body attacks your pancreas and breaks down those beta cells. Beta cells are what produce insulin. So if there's no beta cells, there's no insulin. So the name insulin dependent comes from the fact that you have to give these people insulin. If you don't, they don't produce their own. They're not going to get any glucose into their cells. Eventually it's going to be a problem. Okay. The other thing with this being an autoimmune disorder, it has genetic components, like the other type of diabetes does, but you're not usually going to see this show up in a newborn. Okay, it's going to take some type of an illness or some type of stressful event that the immune system is going out fighting something else, that then it will turn and fight the beta cells as well. Okay, it's not that that infection caused the diabetes. It's just that that infection caused stress in the body, which caused this to flare up. That kind of makes sense. Okay, so you'll see older children like a year, 2 years, something like that, that you'll find out they have diabetes. Okay, so when 90% of the beta cells are destroyed, insulin secretion falls critically low, and you have to supplement with insulin shots. Okay, untreated, death can result from ketoacidosis. So ketoacidosis is the production of acetone in your body from the breakdown of fats. So you're using fats to live off instead of sugars. Okay, and this causes your blood to become acidic. And when your pH changes, your protein's denature. And when your protein's denature, it's not good. Okay, so ketoacidosis, you can detect it on a patient from their breath. So it has an acetone smell or like a fruity smell. So you can know if somebody's going into ketoacidosis just by smelling them. Now, again, I said I wasn't going to go off topic again, but do you guys know of any diets that restrict your carbohydrate intake and you use lipids instead? It can cause the same thing, guys. If you cut your carbohydrates down to nothing and all your body is doing is living off of fats, you can cause ketoacidosis. Is it common? Not really, but it can happen. Okay. Type 2. So the answer is always a balanced diet. Keep things balanced. Okay. Type 2 is non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, and it accounts for the majority of cases. So 90% of the cases of diabetes mellitus are type 2. The other 10% is divided between type 1 and gestational diabetes. Okay? So the problem with type 2 is insulin resistance. So the target cells lack insulin receptors, or those insulin receptors don't work. Okay? And so they can't respond to the hormone. So you can give, well, let me back up. So the treatment for type 1 diabetes is give them insulin. You want them to have insulin because their body doesn't make it. For type 2, their bodies may still be making plenty of insulin. It's just those receptors that aren't working. So what you do is you give them medicine to help the body absorb the glucose. Okay? There are cases with type 2 diabetics that you do have to introduce insulin, but that usually comes later in the disease where the body says, okay, I'm producing insulin, it's not doing anything, I'll just stop making it. Okay? So there are cases in type 2 diabetes where you do have to give them insulin, but it's more often than not that you're giving them other medicines that help the glucose get into the cell. Okay, so causes of type 2, heredity. So So again, this is passed down from generation to generation, but heredity and environment are big cofactors in type 2 diabetes. Okay, so age. This is, you're usually older when you get type 2 diabetes, but there are cases of children and adolescents who get type 2 diabetes. Obesity also plays a big role, and it has to do with your sugar intake. If you are constantly eating sugary things, you're overloading your system with glucose. Eventually, you're going to have problems in it. Okay? All right. Hyperinsulinism, too much insulin. Okay? So it's an insulin reaction. It occurs when a diabetic injects too much insulin, causes a rapid glucose uptake by those cells, and this person becomes hypoglycemic, weak, and hungry. So the brain says, oh no, there's no sugar in my body. I need to eat. Okay? So when this goes uncorrected, it can produce insulin shock. In this instance, the brain is deprived of glucose because we've sucked all the glucose out of the blood, so it's not going to get it to the brain. And disorientation, convulsions, or unconsciousness can result. Okay? So it's very important to monitor insulin carefully. You don't want them to have not enough, but you don't want them to have too much either. All right. Talk to your buddy. See if you can answer this. All right, what should you give him? Insulin. Okay. So she is in ketoacidosis, so you need to give her insulin to get the sugar into the cells. And then finally, our very last slide of information, the gonads. Okay, so our sex hormones produced by the testes and ovaries. Again, we're not going to spend much time with this because you are going to spend a whole section in AP2 talking about the reproductive system. Okay, but in males, our pituitary gland, super important, told by the hypothalamus to release luteinizing hormone, follicle-stimulating hormone. Luteinizing hormone causes the release of testosterone. Follicle-stimulating hormone causes the production of sperm. And then the testosterone goes on to do a lot of the male characteristics. Okay? Female, again, it starts with the anterior pituitary. You're releasing follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. And the hormones in a female are very cyclical. So they go up and they go down. And the purpose of those changes in hormones is to, first of all, create an egg. So up here, we're creating a mature egg and then causing it to be released. That's the first step. The second step is to prepare the uterine wall. So we want to make sure that that uterus has a nice, comfy covering around it. So if the egg gets fertilized, it will have somewhere to embed and sit. Okay? If the egg does not get fertilized and that nice, comfy uterine lining does not get used, you get rid of it, and then you have to make it again the next month. Okay? So in females, we have a peak of luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone right before ovulation. And then we also have a peak of estrogen right before ovulation. And then after ovulation, you have a peak of progesterone. Okay? It's all about getting the egg ready and getting the uterus ready. All right. Here's what you need to know about your... Are there any questions? Okay. Here's what you need to know about your last two tests. Your exam 6, 50 questions. Make sure you study your table. There are a lot of matching questions on this test. Okay? It's going to be asked in every different way. So you're going to be given a hormone and say, where did it come from? You're going to give it a hormone and say, where is it going? A hormone, and what does it do? Okay, so all of the different ways. Make sure you know it. Also know your objectives. Okay, so that includes all the homeostatic imbalances, and it includes just general endocrine information. Okay? Then your final exam is going to include about 75 muscle and bone diagrams. Okay? So remember how you had that big chart, that big chart and all those pictures at the end of the test? You're going to have one of those again with muscles and bones. About 75 of them, ones that you've seen before. Yeah, yeah?
Is that like 75 bones, 75 muscles?
Together. Yeah. So about 30 something of each. Yeah.
So those muscles and bones are still off the previous exam.
Exactly. Yep. Yes. Yes. They come from previous tests. Yep. And then the rest of the test, other multiple choice questions, there's going to be about 20 to 30 from each of your tests. And again, those are copied and pasted. So we're going to go to the old test, choose 20 to 30 from each one, copy it, paste it over to the new document. Voila, we have an exam. Except for test 6, the one you're taking Monday, there's only going to be about 5 or 10 questions from that one. Okay? It's shorter. There's only 50 questions, and we've just covered the information. You just had a test on it. Okay? Do you guys have any questions? Yes.
How many points altogether in the final?
100 points. There are usually around 200 questions, but it's a total of 100 points.
Oh, okay.
So each question's worth a half a point this time.
Yeah. We're gonna 0 get 100.
Are there any other questions you have about the exam or the test?